we're pulling back the curtain on this fascinating, almost invisible machine that's being used right now to control the modern media landscape. We're going to dive into a highly coordinated legal strategy that's designed to silence critics. And here's the kicker. It doesn't do this by actually winning legal arguments. It does it by weaponizing fear. It's a massive story about power, intimidation, and how the news you and I consume every single day might literally be filtered by fear. All right, let's jump right in. Our source material kicks things off with a really interesting observation. Something unusual started happening, quietly at first. For a while, if you looked across the media landscape, pieces of information were just vanishing. Now, this wasn't one massive, undeniable event. It was more like these scattered, seemingly completely unrelated retractions and deletions. Honestly, if you weren't paying super close attention, you probably would have missed it entirely. But as we're going to see, these absolutely weren't isolated incidents. They were the visible symptoms of a highly coordinated strategy of silence. So let's connect the dots here. A major publication quietly pulls a story. A well-known publisher suddenly edits parts of a book. A political strategist just entirely deletes a podcast episode. On the surface, you'd probably think, okay, sure, maybe they just made editorial mistakes, right? But when you look at them all together, a unified playbook emerges. The goal wasn't to correct the record in a court of law. No, the goal was to keep the fight out of the courtroom entirely by making sure these stories simply ceased to exist.
Section 1. The Intimidation Playbook, a Strategy of Panic.
Let's break down exactly how this operates. This is a legal strategy that relies almost entirely on inducing panic, rather than, actually getting a factual victory before a judge. So step 1. You don't just threaten a standard lawsuit. You issue an overwhelming, massive legal threat. Step 2. You attach this impossibly tight 24-hour deadline to it. And step 3, you force compliance. You get that retraction or that deletion without ever having to actually file a single legal case. The whole point here is simply to make fighting back seem way too expensive and stressful for any normal person or even a large organization to actually endure. $1 billion. Seriously, just let the sheer shock value of that number sink in for a second. The source material notes that these lawsuits are sometimes threatened at over $1 billion in damages. Now, why such a crazy number? Well, not because they're easy cases to win, but because they are incredibly expensive to fight. Think about it. Even if you are 100% in the right, and even if you know you'd eventually win in court, the legal fees alone to defend against $1 billion lawsuit could absolutely destroy you. The time, the stress, the public exposure. For most people, the only logical, rational choice is to just walk away and comply. Section 2. The Disruptors. Refusal to play along. For a while, this intimidation strategy worked exactly as intended, and a lot of voices went quiet. It seemed completely unbeatable, until it hit a total brick wall. Let's look at the inciting incident. In August 2025, Hunter Biden appeared in a long-form interview with independent journalist Andrew Callahan. During this sit-down, he repeated a claim, one that had actually already been reported previously, that Jeffrey Epstein had once said he introduced Melania Trump to Donald Trump. It's really crucial to note here that this wasn't presented as some brand new revelation. It was just referencing existing reporting. But man, the reaction was swift. Within days, a legal ultimatum arrived demanding he retract the statement, issue a formal apology, and take down the video immediately. Now, I want to take a brief pause right here. 24 hours. That was the deadline they gave. Our source material makes a really profound point about this. A one-day deadline isn't about careful legal process. It's a psychological tactic. Think about it. When you give someone just one day to respond to a $1 billion threat, you are deliberately not giving them the time to think clearly or consult extensive legal counsel. You're forcing them to react. You are trying to induce absolute panic. So the crucial thing to look at here is comparing what was supposed to happen with what actually happened. The expected reaction, according to the playbook, was compliance, right? Take down the video, say you're sorry, walk away. But the actual reaction totally broke the model. Hunter Biden flatly refused, immediately did a follow-up interview, and astonishingly, openly welcomed the lawsuit. Let's look a little closer at these disruptive actions. He bluntly refused to apologize. No hesitation, no fear. He demanded that the case actually move forward so they could do sworn depositions under oath. The irony of this is just incredible. This whole intimidation strategy relies entirely on the target believing the threat will destroy them. But by inviting the consequences and literally demanding testimony under penalty of perjury, he completely called their bluff. And you know what happened? That anticipated $1 billion lawsuit, it just never materialized. No case was ever filed against him. Section 3. The Reversal. going on the offensive. Rejecting a threat is one thing, right? But what happens when you actually go on the offensive? Enter the anti-SLAPP law. This is a super vital legal concept to understand. It stands for Strategic Lawsuits Against Public Participation. Basically, anti-SLAPP laws are designed specifically to protect people from these exact types of intimidation tactics. Veteran journalist Michael Wolff, who had also been investigating powerful figures, decided not to wait around to be sued. He used this law to sue his threateners first, in New York. In one brilliant move, he completely reversed the power dynamic. The people issuing the threats were now the ones being challenged in court. And wow, the reaction to being sued was incredibly telling. Once the threateners were dragged into court, that aggressive billion-dollar posture completely vanished. It was instantly replaced by attempted delays, efforts to move the case out of New York, and technical arguments over jurisdiction and service instead of the actual facts of the case. It's really something to behold when billionaires threaten world-ending litigation, only to suddenly hide behind technical jurisdictional rules the very moment a judge gets involved. As the source notes, when your legal case is strong, you push it forward. You don't try to slow it down. Behavior like this usually signals a very weak legal position. Section 4. The backfire effect. Fueling the fire. The collapse of this strategy didn't just end in the courtroom. It spilled right back out into the public eye. Let's walk through the rapid timeline of how this all unraveled. August 2025. That initial interview triggers the massive threats. Just 24 hours later, the deadline expires and the bluff is called. Fast forward to late 2025. Michael Wolff goes on the offensive with his anti-SLAPP suit, putting the threateners firmly on their heels. And then, in April 2026, the situation hits a boiling point when Melania Trump actually steps in front of cameras to issue a prepared public statement addressing the controversy directly. In this statement, she denied the claims and rejected the connection, but she didn't take any questions. And our source material highlights the ultimate irony here. In trying to shut down the narrative, the statement amplified it. Delivering this rigid denial without engaging in any questions didn't close the book on the issue at all. Instead, it inadvertently pulled a massive spotlight right back onto the very controversy they had just threatened $1 billion to hide. Let's look at the direct consequences of that backfire. Media attention fiercely returned. Old reports that had pretty much been forgotten suddenly resurfaced. Past photos began circulating all over the internet again, and even political figures started pushing for formal investigations. So a strategy meant to silence the discussion ended up creating exponentially more of it. The very people who refused to back down became the central figures in keeping the conversation alive, and the intimidation pattern itself literally became the story. By trying to force silence, they basically guaranteed that everyone, including us right now, would be talking about it. Section 5. The courtroom reality. Facing the music. So the situation is no longer disappearing quietly. Because the bluff was called, everything is moving toward the exact place this playbook was designed to avoid. There's a really stark contrast to look at here. The intimidation playbook relies on a safe, completely controlled environment, controlled statements, scripted PR messages, and the ability to just walk away from uncomfortable questions. But the courtroom reality? That is unforgiving. In a court, there are no controlled statements, only hard evidence. There are no scripted messages, only sworn testimony. And you definitely cannot just walk away. You face strict scrutiny under oath. This reality is exactly what that billion-dollar threat was built to prevent in the first place. We've seen how a strategy built on fear completely collapsed when it was faced with disruptors who simply weren't afraid. But it leaves us with an incredible lingering thought. If the billion-dollar bluff no longer guarantees silence, and these threats actually end up forcing the very public trials they were meant to stop, what happens when these tightly guarded secrets actually reach the stand? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll leave you to think about that until next time.